The month is May, hooray, hooray, hooray. So go outside and play today because the month is May. Yay! In the month of May, I wonder what will happen to Charlotte and her friend Hay. Good morning, super sparkly sapphires. Today is Friday, May 22nd, 2020. It is the 162nd day of school. How many days are left? Let's see. 5, 10. 10 days left in school. Find a mindful position in 5, 4, 3, 2, wonderful. It's time for your daily pop quiz. Maps. Which of our states is an island or a group of islands? Calendars. Name both days of the week that begin with the letter T. Shapes. How many flat surfaces are there on a sphere? Numbers. How do you spell the number 1? Reading. I'm going to spell a word and you should draw a picture of this thing on your paper. R-A-I-N. Spelling. How do you spell from? United States history. Where did the two railroad lines meet? Money. What is worth more money, 1/4 or 24 pennies? Writing. Name an uppercase letter that only has straight lines. No slants and no curves, just straight lines. Stuart Little. How many days did Stuart teach at the school? Get ready to check your answers. Number 1, Hawaii is our island state. Number 2 is Tuesday and Thursday. Number 3 is 0. Number 4 is O-N-E. Number 5, you should have a picture of rain. Number 6 is F-R-O-M. Number 7 is Promontory Point, or you could have just said Utah. Number 8 is 1/4. Number 9, you could have said E-F-H-I or T. Number 10 is 1 day. Nice job on your quiz. Now it's time for a story. Fiction Friday, Stuart Little, Chapter 13, Ames Crossing. In the loveliest town of all, where the houses were white and high, and the elm trees were green and higher than the houses, where the front yards were wide and pleasant, and the backyards were bushy and worth finding out about, where the street sloped down to the stream, and the stream flowed quietly under the bridge, where the lawns ended in orchards, and the orchards ended in fields, and the fields ended in pastures, and the pastures climbed the hill and disappeared over the top toward the wonderful wide sky. In this loveliest of all towns, Stuart stopped to get a drink of sarsaparilla. That's like root beer. Doesn't that sound like a beautiful town? Makes me want to go on a road trip. Parking his car in front of the general store, he stepped out, and the sun felt so good that he sat down on the porch for a few moments to enjoy the feeling of being in a new place on a fine day. That is a really good feeling. This was the most peaceful and beautiful spot he had found in all his travels. It seemed to him a place he would gladly spend the rest of his life in, if it weren't that he might get homesick for the sights of New York and for his family, Mr. and Mrs. Frederick C. Little and George, and if it weren't for the fact that something deep inside him made him want to find Margalo. Ooh, we're on page 100. Here is the general store in Ames Crossing. There's Stuart's little car driving up. After a while, the storekeeper came out to smoke a cigarette, and he joined Stuart on the front steps. He started to offer Stuart a cigarette, but when he noticed how small he was, he changed his mind. "Have you any sarsaparilla in your store?" asked Stuart. "I've got a ruinous thirst." "Certainly," said the storekeeper. "Gallons of it. Sarsaparilla, root beer, birch beer, ginger ale, moxie, lemon soda, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, Dipsy-Cola, Pipsy-Cola, Popsy-Cola, and raspberry cream tonic. Anything you want." "Let me have a bottle of sarsaparilla, please," said Stuart, "and a paper cup." The storekeeper went back into the store and returned with the drink. He opened the bottle, poured some out into the cup, and set the cup down on the step below Stuart, who whipped off his cap, lay down on his stomach, and dipped up some of the cool, refreshing drink, using his cap as a dipper. That's pretty silly. "That's very refreshing," remarked Stuart. "There's nothing like a long, cool drink in the heat of the day when you're traveling." "Are you going far?" asked the storekeeper. "Perhaps very far," replied Stuart. "I'm looking for a bird named Margalo. You haven't sighted her, have you?" "Can't say I have," said the storekeeper. "What does she look like?" "Perfectly beautiful," replied Stuart, wiping the sarsaparilla off his lips with the corner of his sleeve. "She's a remarkable bird. Anyone would notice her. She comes from a place where there are thistles." The storekeeper looked at Stuart closely. "How tall are you?" he asked. "You mean in my socks?" said Stuart. "Yes." 2.25 inches, answered Stuart. "I haven't been measured recently, however. I may have shot up a bit." "You know," said the storekeeper thoughtfully, "there's somebody in this town you really ought to meet." "Who's that?" asked Stuart. "Harriet Ames," said the storekeeper. "She's just your size, maybe a bit shorter, if anything." "What's she like?" asked Stuart. "Harriet is considered to be one of the best dressed girls in town. All her clothes are tailored especially for her." "Is that so?" remarked Stuart. "Yes, Harriet's quite a girl. Her people, the Ameses, are rather prominent in this town. That means important. One of her ancestors used to be a ferryman here in the Revolutionary days. He would carry anybody across the stream. He didn't care whether they were British or American, as long as they paid their fare. I guess he did pretty well. Anyway, the Ameses have always had plenty of money. They live in a big house with a lot of servants." "Oh, I know Harriet would be very much interested to meet you." This is a very old book to use that word servants, isn't it? "That's very kind of you," replied Stuart, "but I'm not much of a society man. Too much on the move. I never stay anywhere long. I blow into a town and I blow right out again, here today and gone tomorrow. The highways and byways are where you'll find me, always looking for Margalo. Sometimes I feel that I'm quite near to her and that she's just around the corner. Other times I feel that I'll never find her or hear her voice again. Which reminds me, it's time that I was on my way." Stuart paid for his drink, said goodbye to the storekeeper, and drove off. But Ames Crossing seemed like the finest town he had ever known, and before he reached the end of the main street, he swerved left, turned onto a dirt road, and drove down to a quiet spot on the bank of the river. That afternoon, he swam and lay on his back on the mossy bank, his hands crossed under his head, his thoughts returning to the conversation he had with the storekeeper. "Harriet Ames," he murmured. Evening came, and Stuart still lingered by the stream. He ate a light supper of a cheese sandwich and a drink of water, and slept that night in the warm grass, with the sound of the stream in his ears. There he is on the bank. In the morning, the sun rose warm and bright, and Stuart slipped into the river again for an early dip. After breakfast, he left his car hidden under a skunk cabbage leaf. Oh, remember Elmer and the dragon, how the dragon ate skunk cabbages? And he walked to the post office. While he was filling his fountain pen from the public inkwell, he happened to glance toward the door, and what he saw startled him so that he almost lost his balance and fell into the ink. A girl, about 2 inches high, and entered and was crossing the floor toward the mailboxes. She wore sports clothes and walked with her head held high. In her hair was the stamen from a flower. Stuart began to tremble from excitement. "Must be the Ames girl," he said to himself. Here she is walking into the store. Remember, she's 2 inches tall. He kept out of sight behind the inkwell as he watched her open her mailbox, which was about 1/4 of an inch wide, and pull out the letters. The storekeeper had told the truth. Harriet was pretty, and of course she was the only girl Stuart had ever encountered who wasn't miles taller than he was. Stuart figured that if the two of them were to walk along together, her head would come a little higher than his shoulder. The idea filled him with interest. He wanted to slide down to the floor and speak to her, but he didn't dare. All his boldness had left him, and he stayed hidden behind the inkwell until Harriet had gone. When he was sure that she was out of sight, he stole out of the post office and slunk down the street to the store, half hoping that he would meet the little girl, half fearing that he would. He was nervous, I guess. "Have you any engraved stationery?" asked the storekeeper. That's paper and envelopes to write a letter. "I'm behind on my correspondence, that is, the act of writing a letter." The storekeeper helped Stuart up onto the counter and found some letter paper for him, small paper marked with the initial L. Stuart whipped out his fountain pen and sat down against a 5-cent candy bar and began writing a letter to Harriet. Here he is, thinking of what to say in his letter, and there he is, dipping down into the ink with his pen. This is what he wrote. "My dear Miss Ames, I am a young person of modest proportions. By birth, I am a New Yorker, but at the moment I am traveling on a business of a confidential matter. That means it's a secret. My travels have brought me to your village. Yesterday, the keeper of your local store gave me a most favorable report of your character.